Welcome aboard! We will be your guides during this magical journey into the movies. It's the perfect job for us because we love the movies. It's showtime! Ready when you are, CB!
Action!
Welcome to Monoreel Radio episode number 293. I'm Sean.
And I'm Jackie.
And we are here this week to review and discuss the live-action Inspector Gadget film as it celebrates its 25th anniversary. It's a funny word to use, celebrate. I saw this in movie theaters. I was 13 years old. And I was sort of aging out of Disney at the age of 13, specifically to go see an Inspector Gadget movie. But Inspector Gadget, when I was a kid, you think I talk about Ghostbusters a lot. Inspector Gadget, to me, was probably my favorite cartoon of all time. I put it in the top 3 with Ghostbusters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to this day. So there was no way on earth I was going to miss the Inspector Gadget movie.
I didn't see this in theaters, and I don't think I've ever seen it until we put it on to review for this week, because I surely would have remembered this. But much like you, I watched Inspector Gadget all the time. I wouldn't say that it was one of my favorite cartoons. I was more like Rugrats was my favorite, hands down. I was more like Rugrats, Doug, the Disney Afternoon, Gummy Bears, DuckTales, all of that. But I do remember watching this constantly. It was just one of those things. It was always on, so I would just sit there and watch it. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy it, but it's not to say that I loved it either. So this wasn't on my radar as much when it hit the theaters. But I can see why they wanted to do something like this. This was very popular in the 90s, was doing, if you think live action remakes are popular now, it really was a big deal in the 90s to bring these cartoons to life. And I can see where they would have wanted to do Inspector Gadget on the heels of something like the Flintstones, which was so successful and so well done and so incredible. Granted, this was 5 years later, and maybe waiting 5 years was not the move.
Well, you know what? I'm going to bring this up now. I was going to wait until later, but I think this is the perfect opportunity to bring this up. Yes, the Flintstones, tremendous success. That was a Universal film. Universal, at one point, did have the film rights to this.
Everybody did. I'm so glad you brought this up. Not just the rights to it, but the amount of people that were at one point or another attached to this project. Spielberg wanted to do it for Amblin, and I think he had to pass because he was working on Saving Private Ryan at the time. I think he wanted to do it with Chevy Chase, I believe.
He did.
Zemeckis was attached to direct at one point or another, and then the Farrelly brothers were going to write it. So at one point or another, there was huge talent across the board in every single department that wanted a piece of this.
The Farrelly brothers were going to write it. Jim Carrey was going to play the lead. That was an original idea. Cameron Diaz was going to be cast, but she was doing Any Given Sunday. Brendan Fraser had been considered, but has already done George of the Jungle. Ivan Reitman was signed on to produce this until Disney bought Deke, the production company that made Inspector Gadget. They considered hiring, you ready for this? Martin Scorsese.
Oh my gosh.
To direct this film. Kevin Kline, Steve Carell, Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, Mike Myers, Jay Moore, Jerry Seinfeld, Mel Gibson, Dana Carvey, Michael Keaton, Adam Sandler, and Robin Williams were all considered to play the lead before Matthew Broderick landed it. Matthew Broderick, obviously, he's a Hollywood legend. He's an incredible talent. He has a hell of a resume. And they hired David Kellogg to direct the film, who is best known for directing Vanilla Ice's Cool as Ice. So, you went from Martin Scorsese and Ivan Reitman and the Farrelly brothers to David Kellogg. Was this the right move to make? To your point, Did Disney wait 5 years too long to make the movie? That, on top of many other things, is what we are here to discuss today.
This episode is sponsored by Fierce Fox Co., designers of handmade silkscreen shirts. Fierce Fox has a t-shirt, tank top, hoodie, or crew neck for every fandom. So whether it's the movies or theme parks, princesses or villains, the MCU or Star Wars, everyone will find something they love. The designs range from subtle quotes from our favorite films to iconic characters we can wear proudly in so many different styles, such as sketchbook and concert tees. Listeners of Monoreel Radio can get a 20% discount using the code Monoreel at checkout. Visit fiercefoxco.com to check out all of the collections, and I feel like we need to personally apologize to Brittany right now for what is to come on this episode that she is sponsoring.
John Brown is a Bradford Robotics security guard who dreams of being a Riverton police officer. Artemis Bradford and his daughter Brenda are working on robotic prototypes for the mysterious Gadget project, including a mechanical foot. Brenda is also the love interest of John Brown. A wealthy tycoon named Sanford Skolex breaks into their lab one night, kills Artemis, and steals the prototypes. He and his driver Sykes are pursued by John, whose car flips over and is then blown up by Skolex. A bowling ball flies from John's car and crushes Skolex's hand. Mayor Wilson pressures Brenda to finish the Gadget project due to John's willingness to help others as well as his life-threatening injuries. He is selected by Brenda, handpicked to be the test subject for the Gadget project, which they are going to use to help the local police force. Skolex, meanwhile, has his hand replaced with a robotic claw with help from his associate Kramer, who works to develop more tech from the stolen prototypes. John, meanwhile, awakens from his coma to see that he is now a cyborg, and Brenda helps him adjust to his gadgets and his powers, although he tends to bumble and stumble his way through all of it. Brenda then introduces him to the Gadget Mobile, a car that is basically controlled by AI. Both John and Claw compete for Brenda's attention and affection, and Claw eventually offers her a job that seems too good to be true, with unlimited resources to do her research. While John wants to be a real cop, Chief Quimby continues to assign him to meaningless tasks like rescuing kittens from trees. John wants to solve Artemis's murder, and Quimby wants him off the force. Claw, meanwhile, steals Brenda's data and builds an evil Inspector Gadget clone named Robo-Gadget to ruin the public perception of the Gadget project. The real Gadget, with help from his niece Penny, investigates and realizes that Skolex stole the tech and killed Artemis. He warns Brenda that Skolex is not who he appears to be. He infiltrates Skolex's lab and finds the stolen prototypes, while Brenda meets a dim-wit clone of herself named, ready for this? Robo Brenda, who then just falls from the roof of the building after telling Brenda that Skolex stole the foot that she and her father had developed. Claw captures Gadget and shows him that his goal is to ultimately create an army of robo soldiers, and orders Kramer to remove Gadget's chip, which eventually it is removed and destroyed by Claw because Kramer does not want to destroy it, and that leaves Inspector Gadget dead. While the Robo-Gadget destroys Riverton. The lab is destroyed, and Brenda and Penny find the deceased John Brown. Brenda kisses him, and he comes back to life without the chip and pursues the evil Claw. They eventually fight, and there's a snatch and grab, and he gets away, and he doesn't, and then he has to fight Robo-Gadget, while Brenda confronts Claw, who is then going to take her hostage. He takes Brenda on a helicopter, which Gadget stops when firing a pen cartridge at the Claw, causing it to malfunction. This is after he has destroyed Robo-Gadget. They all escape. Skolex is arrested by the Gadget Mobile, who then pursues a Volkswagen Beetle as a love interest.
So let's talk about one positive thing that makes me happy. I love that we chose to do the format of our show as a sort of SWOT analysis, because while we know this movie does not have a lot of strengths, Lord knows there are more weaknesses, I feel like this is a perfect example of where you can see a lot of opportunity and what they tried to do. And we've already talked about the threats, because I think the biggest downfall of this movie was that clearly it was in development hell. That, you know, I don't know if it was in development for that long for that, you know, I'm assuming it probably would have been pitched around the same time as the Flintstones because that was a trend of the time. But when you see all of the hands that this was passing through and how many different directors, how many different writers, how many different people were at one point or another attached to it, you know that this was being tossed around for quite a while. And it shows because they clearly did not know what they wanted this movie to be. I really thought that this was going to be something like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because you told me it was bad, but we tried not to get into it too much at all so that I could form my own opinion. And I went in with very little expectations, very little knowledge of anything. But what I was expecting was something like a Roger Rabbit or like a Ghostbusters, where the majority of the cast is going to be playing it straight, but you have one element that is playing for comedy. And I thought that that was it, that Gadget was going to be sort of navigating his way through a very serious world tonally, and he's going to bring the comedy. And because there is no clear-cut definition of who's the straight man, who's the comic relief, it's just a jumbled mess from the beginning. Starting with the title card, which would have been clever if it looked good.
I'm going to get this out of the way right now, because I don't want to repeat the same things over and over again, because there's no reason for us to sit here for longer than is necessary to discuss this film. The CGI is horrific. It's horrific by today's standards. Honestly, it's horrific by 1999 standards, because I remember seeing this in the movie theater with my dad, and at one point he turned and looked at me and he went, "This looks terrible."
It really does. And it's funny because before knowing that at one point Spielberg was attached to this, I was sitting there saying to myself, there is no reason that in a world post Jurassic Park that this looks the way that it does. And to think that Spielberg could have had a hand in it with Amblin, it would have been infinitely better. Even the first shot is just so incredibly awkward. Before realizing that this is a dream sequence and the town is painted, by the way, I believe this is the Warner Brothers lot, knowing how bad of a movie it was, I thought that the green screen was not keyed out of the windows, because you see an apartment over his shoulder. And I went, oh my gosh, is there supposed to be something happening in these windows? And then they start pulling out the frame and you see that the town is in all of these bright colors. But I thought it was a miss from the beginning, and I was like, okay, maybe it's not that bad. And then it turns out it was.
The cuts and the edits are so rough. He's standing by himself. He's standing amongst a crowd. He's standing by himself. Now he's got a crowd around him again. It's really, really bad. And it's so obvious that this looks like a backlot.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then you could even play into that if you wanted to. You could lean into the kitsch of it all because he's dreaming. So you could put this idyllic anywhere Main Street USA and play it off as if this is an idealistic, romanticized vision of what a small town is.
Like the Muppets.
Correct. It's a perfect example. I don't think that's what they did here. I think it just looks really fake and really 90s.
I mean, I'm sort of okay with that because we learn that this is a dream sequence. But what is really funny to me is when we see that he's dreaming, it's not just the CGI that looks bad. They got really sloppy with the practical effects too. I don't know if you caught it, but you could still see on Matthew Broderick's lip whatever the dog actor is licking off, probably peanut butter.
Yeah.
But you can still see the residue because they had to put something on his lips so that the dog would go up to him for the puppy kisses. This whole scene where we meet Penny.
Oh my God.
It is just so oddly paced. the cadence just feels off
Yes.
from the jump. First of all, forehead kiss, weird. It wouldn't have been weird if, as her uncle, he did that to her. And I understand that you're trying to establish a close relationship between the two of them, but it just felt kind of icky. And they do hug later, and she sort of gives him, a boost of confidence, and that would have been fine. What I bump on the most, though, is that they are having two different conversations at the same time. They're trying to establish the idea that he's insecure about his job as security, which you've done by him getting a letter of rejection from the police department. Done. We can move on from that scene. Instead, there's another conversation woven in that you think they finish and then starts back up again while they're having the letter of rejection conversation about him going to Penny's school. And he's like, I don't know. I think I have to work. And then they put it to bed, and then she brings it back up and she's like, no, you're off. You can come. And he's like, I'm sorry. This one's a lawyer. This one's a doctor. And I don't want to embarrass you in front of your friends or whatever, which is such a 90s trope, by the way. There was every sitcom had an episode where it was career day and somebody's parent was embarrassed by what they did. And these conversations are being cut against each other. It is just so weird. Pick one or the other. You didn't need both.
It's almost like they told Michelle Trachtenberg, who can act, by the way. Even though I don't think I was very kind to Ice Princess, and I'm certainly not going to be kind to this, though I think in both instances I said, not her fault. It's like they told her, everything you've trained for and everything that we've taught you, forget it. Forget everything that you know. She seems like she's being held in this room against her will. That awkward laugh, ha ha ha, Uncle John. It's like, you're right. From the moment she comes on screen, it's so cringy. It's uncomfortable.
It also feels, the way that they shot it, like that space is so tight. I feel like the two of them, are constantly hitting into the camera. I don't know how you make a space just feel that small. And maybe that was the intent because it's supposed to feel like a tiny apartment. But you need to give your actors room to move within their set, and they just don't have it. It feels so clunky across the board. The only takeaway from this scene is I like when she tells him, to sort of clear the air that she's not embarrassed by him. She says it's not the badge, it's the heart behind it. And as nice as a line as that is, this should be our through line for the rest of the movie, because later we're going to learn that the Gadgets are moved by will, not by thought. It's his heart that's carrying him through. It's what allows him to sort of come back to life at the very end. And yet, we're going to see very awkward, clunky deployment of these gadgets because he's using his head and not his heart. And if he's got a heart and we're setting this up now and his heart is in the right place, he should have been able to use these gadgets a lot more smoothly as we're going through. But we'll talk about that as we get into it. We're not even out the first scene yet, and it's fallen apart.
I mean, here's the thing. I do like the setup, and I like his motivation. I don't like how they execute it, because you're right, it's totally clunky. And I think it's noteworthy as well that I think a lot of the problems with this film, other than the fact that it passed through so many hands, the initial cut of this film was roughly a half an hour longer than the cut that we have. It tested so poorly in front of a test audience that they cut roughly a half an hour off of this movie, which is why the runtime of this film is so short. When you take the credits out, it's about an hour and 10 minutes long. It is slightly longer than 2 episodes of the actual Inspector Gadget television show with commercials.
It's so short. I did both of my viewings in one day, which we don't normally do. And of course, this is the film where I had to do that and do 2 sittings in one day.
I mean, it could have been worse. It's just the thing you say to make people feel better. The setup, though, makes sense, clunky as it is. I like the fact that we then transition into this lab where we are developing the Gadget project. I mean, at the root of this, it's an origin story.
Yes.
And to its credit, this was sort of ahead of its time. You don't see the origin story of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You don't need an origin story because you get it in the opening credits and the opening theme song. You don't get an origin story in the Flintstones because you don't really need one.
It's the theme song.
Correct.
They're a modern Stone Age family.
But there is something to be said for, can we explore the origins of Inspector Gadget? It's ahead of its time in its thought process. It's just so like clunkily done that you lose any of the good that there was here. I think that there was a path they were trying to go down. Perhaps if you had a Scorsese in there, you would have been able to pull it off. And I think that's kind of what they tried to do with setting up this entire thing with the lab and with the Gadget project.
I like that you bring that up because I feel like that's something that could have made this a lot stronger. Cut the entire dream sequence. The opening of the film is him trying to pursue this career as a cop, as a detective. Accident happens, and then opening credits are assembling him as a machine, sort of. And then, you start the movie with a jumping off point of him having to learn all of this gear. Because I think a lot of the problem is seeing him put together. Because leading up to that point, it's very, very dark. And then it gets very silly to see him being assembled. And this is what I was saying, where I was sort of expecting a Roger Rabbit type of movie, but it doesn't know what the tone is yet. And it feels very convoluted. I like all of this stuff with Brenda and her father. I think that was good. To your point, I think that in theory, the setup here is really good about how this technology is actually going to work. I do bump on, although this is minutia compared to the rest of the film, is that, he's night security. So Penny's home alone. She's still kind of young for that, I feel like. But honestly, that's not the most egregious thing that this film does. Even though at some points it's starting to feel like a ripoff, there are a lot of elements that feel very familiar to Honey, I Shrunk the Kids in this lab scene once Claw breaks in and starts stealing the invention. I thought, and I had to back it up at least 5 times, I thought we saw a recycled shot of the shrink machine zapping. It's not, because you pointed out that the shrink machine, we're on like camera right and this shot is camera left. But you thought it might be Nick's smaller one.
I think without confirmation, you could make the case that it may be, but we can't say definitively. I do think that they did recycle props from that set to build this lab.
The helmet.
Yeah. I think that they did recycle quite a bit, which would make sense because you could. There's another movie that this is not a contrast of, that this is not similar to, it's a direct ripoff of, but I'm going to hold that for just a few moments. And any child of the 80s knows where I'm going with this. They killed Artemis. I remember thinking, as a kid, being very surprised that they went for it, and you see them fire at him. You then see Brenda clutching his body. There's no open wound or anything, but you do see him get killed, and you do see a body.
It's dark enough, yeah.
It's dark enough, and frankly, I think you needed that because you needed to build up that Skolex is evil because he's not yet Dr. Claw, okay? But the other thing is, I think that you needed to make up for a really horrific meet cute between Brenda and John.
Ugh.
He's too awkward. It's really, really cringy and bad.
Well, I think what makes it so awkward, too, is that their relationship is not defined. Because clearly he has a crush on her. He's dreaming about her. clearly they know each other because he's working at her father's lab as security. And it wasn't like oh, hey, remember me? Like, I work here sort of me. He's like walking her out to her car. It almost seems like this is sort of a nightly routine with the two of them.
Yeah.
There's a familiarity here. So it's not quite a meet cute because they are not meeting. They're not thrown into this situation together. But we don't know how long they've known each other. We need a little bit more context of how long he's been working there. Actually, no. We know it's 2 years from the letter in the beginning of the film because they said that 2 years of night security is not enough to join the force. But we just need a little bit more context of how long they've known each other. And I think it wouldn't feel so awkward because then we would know that he's been trying to pursue something more with her, but he's just too afraid.
Yeah.
But yeah, just awkward nonetheless. And then I wish that they would have left it here tonally with this dark, almost, if they had done like the noir satire, because you're already gifted with the fact that this is a police department. So you can have that detective noir kind of feel, like with Eddie Valiant and Roger Rabbit. And then have Gadget pulling all of the silly stuff and making sort of a mockery of the force that he wants to be so badly to be a part of. And they just don't go for it. And I don't think that has anything to do even with the fact that we see Claw in human form. I think it would have lent to the film if like in the cartoon, we never see his face because it makes him more ominous. But to your point, this is an origin story. So I'm okay with seeing how he became Claw. Even though it's a ridiculous bowling ball with product placement abound.
Yeah, the product placement is just so rough, and it really does date the movie.
I would have been fine with a Yahoo billboard had they not used the sound that, like, we as kids who grow up in the 90s in the dawn of the internet and search engines, like, we're going to know that Yahoo sound. Because it was so, if you weren't watching the commercial, but you heard that, you knew exactly what it was. It makes it feel very cartoony. And again, I would be fine with that if the comedic elements in the rest of the movie were more clearly defined.
I have a lot of issues with, like you just said, the bowling ball. I'm glad you bring that up because I want to bring that up and I want to bring where this is a complete ripoff of another film. I despise the fact that you see Claw's face for the entire movie. That's not Dr. Claw. And they don't even refer to him as Dr. Claw here. He's just Claw. Like
Madonna.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be fine if we had to see the accident set up, but then after that, we don't see him at all. But I do think that has more to do with you pulled name talent for this role and they were not going to be okay with showing their face for 2 minutes and then not at all.
Here's my thing. You so built in the perfect means of making him Dr. Claw. And then you could have hidden his face. I'll tell you right now how you do it. Instead of this ridiculous bowling ball, okay, Dr. Claw is so evil and ominous in the cartoon. It's what makes the cartoon so good, other than the comedy is there with the cartoon, but you have this bumbling dimwit of a detective up against, Mad. So he's really, really a great villain. You completely douse water on him when a bowling ball crushes his hand, and he's just an eccentric tycoon with a hand that's missing because a bowling ball hit it.
He's in a car wreck. It couldn't have been easier to take it out.
Here's the easy fix for this. When he lights the cigar, which is really dynamite, and throws it underneath John Brown's car, and the car explodes, that could have somehow left him scarred. He could have been too close to it. He would have been a product of his own device.
Yeah.
They then could have rebuilt the claw, and he could have been the man behind the curtain for the rest of the film, and maybe he turns and you see his scarred face at the end of the movie because he wanted to hide his new form.
And you've got further motivation for the character because then he'd have a personal vendetta with Gadget.
Correct. It's the same thing they did with in The Dark Knight with Harvey Dent, with Aaron Eckhart. Mm-hmm. He accidentally basically accidentally becomes Harvey Two-Face, but for a number of reasons, he's pushed over the edge, right? Mentally, physically. You could have done something like that here. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. You didn't need Christopher Nolan to figure that out for this. Instead, you get this ridiculous bowling ball, and after an explosion, you have to rebuild Gadget and make him into what?
Here you go. Yeah.
This is no longer Inspector Gadget.
Yep.
This is RoboCop.
Yes. Thank you. That is my note.
This is the exact same setup as RoboCop.
The body cast does not make sense at all because he's burned. Assuming he lives through, first of all, I think you're asking a lot of the audience to suspend their disbelief to believe that he survived a literal stick of dynamite being thrown at him. I'm okay with the cigar dynamite because that was such like a Hanna-Barbera thing. Like that's Wile E. Coyote. It's what we were used to see the Muppets all the time. You throw a stick of dynamite when in doubt. I'm fine with that. But because it was at such a close range, we know the idea is that he should have exploded and needed to be put back together. But the fact that you hit him at such a close range, he should be burned so much more. So seeing him in a body cast, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that Penny would be allowed to come in and see him and bring a dog. Like, I know we're going for comedy, but also this girl, we don't know anything about where her parents are. She's already dealt with enough trauma that she's being raised by her uncle. Maybe don't bring the kid into this. The other thing that I really bump on is that we don't need Brenda to be a doctor. She's working as a scientist with her father. And as a scientist, if she needs to be a part of this project, okay, fine. But she'd be at the hospital anyway, whether it's for the Gadget project. If they took her father in, she's going to be there regardless. If she's there visiting the man who saved her life, it just seems odd that they have her in like a lab coat acting as a surgeon instead of a scientist. It just doesn't make any sense. And then she performs this highly unethical, non-consensual procedure.
And then the worst part about the movie, I hate to say this, Inspector Gadget, to this day, one of my favorite cartoons of all time. The worst part of his movie is that he comes out of this coma. That's just the truth, because he comes out of it, and using the same thought process with Michelle Trachtenberg. What the hell did you do to Matthew Broderick? I gotta get out of here. Inspector Gadget, the source material of Inspector Gadget is that he's a dim-witted cop that fails upward because he has Penny and brain, right?
Right.
They make him too much of a dimwit here. I know that the comedy was that he would bring the wrong gadgets out during the show, but it somehow trip and fall and make it work. Go Gadget coils. I meant skates. No, you didn't mean skates and said coils. Like you've done too much. You have done too much. You have made him. He's no longer the lovable dimwit. And that's how they categorize him. If you look up the definition of the character in the television show, he's called a dimwit, okay? He's like Barney Fife, right? It's just what he is. This is just an idiot character.
And that is exactly my point about this film suffering from not knowing where the comedy is supposed to come from. If he's going to be the bumbling fool, you need everyone around him to be serious. And instead, he's a straight man of a character because he wants to enforce the law. He wants to better himself. And he's entirely too passive from this whole ordeal. You know, to your point, he's the, I gotta get out of here. Where's the reaction? Whether it's horror, whether it's surprise, whether it's shock, you need something that you just completely changed his body. He's not even relieved that he's still alive. You don't even get that. well, if this is what you had to do to save me, then I understand. We get nothing. Not a damn thing. And I get that, okay, maybe that comes from the shock of things coming out of your fingers, but like there's just still not even enough of the reaction to that because he's falling all over himself. And where it's a real miss is that other than what's happening with the CGI coming out of his fingers, the rest of his body looks fine. We see him standing on two legs, yet he's wobbling about. So he has no control over his legs. It would have been more effective if the coils had come out or the skates had come out. And that's why he's wobbling all over the place. So like being that they didn't go that route and he's able to stand on his own, you had plenty of time to get some sort of reaction from him as to what is happening with his body. And instead, they use it for this really stupid moment so that he can literally fall on top of Brenda and have a super delayed meet cute in this moment. But you're sacrificing way too much to get them together when they're going to have plenty of time together learning how to use all of his new gadgets, except, oh, wait, they don't, because he completely flies through the manual. And that becomes a running joke throughout this whole thing. Didn't you read the manual? Didn't you read the manual? You watched him not read the manual. And they had the perfect setup for that too, because in their parking lot meet, he says, your dad lent me a book on speed study. All you had to do was have him flip through this at warp speed and absorb all of the information. And then the comedy comes from, he read it all, but he just doesn't know how to use it yet.
They covered education better in The Monkey's Uncle than they did. Seriously. And you know what else they did?
With all those dumb questions.
All those dumb questions. You're so brilliant with your dumb questions. Thanks. They let him off the hook, though. They let the stupidity off the hook the minute you introduce the idea that the Gadget Mobile can speak and that the Gadget Mobile is basically going to do it for him.
Well, that's the other thing. He's completely inept. Let's give him a car.
But here's the other thing. From a pop culture perspective, you know how I feel about things like the Batmobile and Ecto-1 and the DeLorean. One of my favorite pop culture cars of all time was the Gadget Mobile. Because in the TV show... Remember something. Here's another thing. In the TV show, people knew who Inspector Gadget was. But he was still at the same time sort of like leading this double life. Because the Gadget Mobile only morphed into a police car when he was pursuing criminals.
Right.
It was otherwise a minivan. Because he was supposed to have this normal home life with Penny and Brain.
Right.
Instead, they give this anthropomorphic AI computer D.L. Hughley. It's a Disney movie! Like, it's annoying from the minute it comes on the screen, and they basically use the Gadget Mobile as a means of solving everything so that Gadget can just trip and fall all over himself, which it is a bastardization of the source material.
Yeah. I completely agree. Breaking the fourth wall in voiceover doesn't work. As funny as that joke is supposed to be with it's a Disney movie, you need to wear your seatbelt. Having it come from this dashboard character and not a real person, like it just doesn't work in the voiceover. To your point, I think that would have been really effective as far as leaning into the source material and having him fail upwards. If the Gadget Mobile transformed into a police car when there was trouble. So in other words, the car would signal to him like, okay, you got to go into cop mode now. And that would have been fine to play it for comedy that way, because it would have demonstrated that he was inept and didn't really know what he should have been looking out for.
Yeah.
The car would have signaled him and then sort of like trip and fall into solving a case. They kind of sort of set that up here with these two escaped prisoners in the jumpsuits. And he's like, oh, these people need help. They've locked themselves out of the car. And then he picks the lock, gets them back into the car that they're trying to steal. And then the car has to spell out for him, hey, no, those are escaped prisoners. It would have been a lot more effective if the car, put the siren on.
Yeah.
And now he's like, okay, I'm in detective mode. And then we see him as a means of comedy trying to use all of these gadgets for the first time. Instead, it's just too much crammed in here.
Yeah, now go arrest the chief from Rescue Me, because that's who that was. That was Chief from Rescue Me.
I knew he looked familiar.
While this is going on, you're getting these horrific cutscenes where look, an animated screw and a spring and a toothbrush, and they're using that as transitions between scenes, which doesn't work in a film.
Oh, it's like the equivalent of a star wipe. It's just awful.
It's really bad. And the most disappointing thing is Sykes and Kramer are literally just there for comic relief. Here's the problem. Good comedy doesn't need this much comic relief, by the way.
Yeah.
You don't need this many bumbling fools in comedy. But be that as it may.
Honestly, Kramer is one of the most intriguing characters to me. And I never thought I'd say that about an Andy Dick character. But I like this idea of he's being pressed into these inventions against his will. He's afraid of Claw, but he's also afraid of hearing any of the illegal dealings with what he's actually doing. But he's going to do it because he's more afraid of the big bad.
Correct. Now, the Claw itself looks great. This is a disappointing thing for me. When you get into the lab, the prototypes and the Claw itself looks really good. It is the coolest prop in the movie.
The opera hand, the sushi hand, like all of that. Super clever.
And later on, where they have that banquet ball, whatever it was that they were throwing, and Skolex is there, the attention to detail is quite good because they put the fake hand on him. They could have just as easily not put a prosthetic on the actor, and they would have just assumed that 8-year-olds aren't going to notice it. They at least knew enough to put the fake hand on Skolex. The problem is that Skolex is insufferable the entire time that he is on the screen. There is nothing about him in this scene or in any of the ones that follow that make him diabolical, that make him scary, that make him Dr. Claw.
And this is where you need to not see him.
Correct. The only thing that they did here that I thought was funny was right before all of this happens, they have him sitting at his desk. And in front of the desk, there's a digital ticker like you'd see it like on Wall Street. There's a ticker. And it's his net worth ticker. And it's just going up, 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 up. It's at that moment that I went, this movie is such a failure. This is a really great sight gag. They're trying to do George of the Jungle again. George of the Jungle came out a year before this did. George of the Jungle is a satire, which works because the actual cartoon was basically satirical. They tried to recreate that with this, but also played it off like a RoboCop movie. There's nothing about this that is satirical enough other than fourth wall break, inside joke, it's a Disney movie. That's to me where it dawned on me what they were trying to do and where it really failed poorly.
You brought up the dance scene. There's no build to it.
No.
You know, we get this quick beat of Penny tying his tie, and she's sort of, she's hinting at, is Brenda going to be there? And he's like, how do you know? And it's, obviously the worst kept secret that he's got a thing for her. So now we've seen 2 interactions with them to this point. It's established she's got a thing for her. We don't quite know where she is with him yet. And this is the scene where she should sort of start to fall for him a little bit. And she does, but then you've got Claw come in, and she is so easily swept away because he feeds her this line of, we went to school together, which the way that it's delivered, I can't even tell if it's truthful or not. I mean, I would expect that Claw is going to lie, but he's not sarcastic enough and the delivery is just all wrong to clue us in, like, is this just a move to get under Gadget's skin? And why are you doing this with her? I feel like they were sort of trying to set up a love triangle, but it's never going to work because, number one, we've established that Gadget is too passive and he's not going to do anything. He's not going to fight for her. And Claw's the bad guy, so he's going to be like Bowser. He's just going to steal her anyway. This scene does nothing to push the story forward for our three leads in any way, shape, or form. The only thing it does to serve the plot is establish that Quimby does not actually believe in him.
Yes. And this is where you feel the most that a lot of things got cut out. Because we go from this immediately into, we got to end the movie. Because they race into the finale. This feels like you're at the midway point of the film, which in the original cut, I suspect you were.
Yeah.
Now we're just going to race to the end of the movie.
There's a montage of Gadget saving kittens from trees because that's what he's been detailed with. Quimby doesn't want to give him anything serious. And that's the other thing. You didn't need this dance scene because now we've set up that Quimby's not going to give him like a legit assignment. So then you get the beat in their office where he asks, like, when are you going to put me on something serious? So, like, it's doing what it needs to do there. The entire dance scene could have been cut out entirely. And to your point, yeah, now we're racing to the end of the movie because Claw builds the duplicate. Yeah. Holy chiclets, Batman. Like, why?
I'm okay with that. The fact that you're making a robot and you want to differentiate him from Matthew Broderick without putting an entire face piece on, like, that of all things is the in fact, I like Robo-Gadget more than actual Gadget, if I'm being honest with you.
It's sort of a funny sight gag, but as if you've not insulted the audience enough, you're going to insult their intelligence again for us to not know that the Gadget with a flamethrower is not our good guy. Like, there's more than enough that you can do with good cop, bad cop that we're going to see the difference. And you could have also done it without all of these Godzilla references to establish that the bad Gadget is destroying the city.
There are so many references to other movies in this movie. When Gadget gets in the Gadget Mobile with Penny and Brenda and goes, I got the need for speed.
Oy.
When Robo-Gadget is chasing people with the Tyrannosaurus Rex shadow puppet, that is an exact scene from Killer Clowns from Outer Space. It's the exact same scene. All they are doing is stealing scenes and plots and dialogue from other movies to make this movie.
No, and sometimes when you pepper things like that in and it's done in a clever way and feels more like a little wink and a nod or a hat tip as opposed to a ripoff, it works. But because this movie is just so poorly done, to your point, it feels like a ripoff. One of my biggest gripes with it is when he breaks into the Bradford file, because Quimby's not going to give him that as an assignment. You know, he establishes this is going to be this is my mission. This is what I want to work on. And he doesn't get the sign off to pursue it. He breaks in, he finds the file, and he finds the little disc with SI on it. So he magnifies it, and he wants it translated. So he asks his getup, what does C mean in Spanish? If you don't know Spanish, how do you know that it's Spanish? It just awful. Just awful. But to me, the worst part of it is Robo Brenda.
Yep.
Sarah Jessica Rabbit Parker.
There is no more senseless character that I think we've ever discussed in the near 6 years that we've been doing this.
And for what? So you get the quote unquote comedy of throwing her off the building. She honestly, Sarah Jessica Parker should sue for how similar she is acting to Sarah Sanderson when she's jumping up and down in the background, running amok. That's literally what this character is, but she's got the Jessica Rabbit wig on.
They did all of this so that she could say, they made me from the foot, they stole from your dad, and then jump off the building. Brenda is smart enough, I think, that she could have found that on her own, considering she is now working in the lab where the stolen prototypes are.
Right. Or give Gadget a win, or have him fall into that by accident.
Robo Brenda, I don't think spends more than 40 seconds on screen. It is therefore the most senseless, useless character of all time. And you did not need her to tell Brenda that they stole the technology. You didn't need it.
And the other thing, Kramer has completely disappeared from the film at this point. Like, that could have been a really good slip for him, because he's so stressed, not only from the pressure that Claw is putting on him, but because he knows Claw is breaking the law. So that would have been a really good slip up for him, or for Sykes. You did not need an entire another character to introduce that idea.
No, instead you get Sykes and Penny, which is fine, but you're right. All of a sudden, Kramer, who's developed this entire thing, is gone. No reference to him, he's just gone. This, again, is where you feel that this film was just massacred in post-production.
The other thing with Penny, is she out? Is she in? Is she out? Is she in? Because the Gadget Mobile drops her back off at home. Brenda goes to find her there. How do we even know where they live? And then that's when they find the dismembered John in the junkyard, which now we shift back to a really tonally dark instance where she's seeing him strewn all over the place. He's like the Tin Man when he's broken up, and all that's left is his head. And now we learn that because what they set up in the beginning, that the Gadget technology is powered by Will. His heart is still in this. He wants to make it right. He wants to avenge Brenda so he can fully operate without the chip that Claw has now stolen. And it's like, so now you've decided to make this your through line again. If this had been your through line the entire time, you would have been able to deploy all of these Gadget devices, have the silly cartoon look while keeping the character as the straight man, because that's what you've established. And now he's starting to land on his feet and earn a couple of wins. And it also would have justified not having him read the manual, because his heart, he knows what he needs in his heart. He doesn't have to think about it. So you could have kept the joke running about not reading the manual, because he wouldn't have needed it, because he doesn't need to think about it. Instead, it's been thought driven the entire time. You don't know what you're doing. That's why all of these gadgets that you don't actually need are deploying, and you're tripping all over yourself. And you still could have had that a little bit by picking one or the other if he's leading with his heart.
Some of the practical effects there are actually quite good when he starts to come back together. I will give the film that. The practical does look pretty good.
And when we do finally see the Gadget copter, I thought that looked pretty good too. I'll give it that one. That could have been the easiest thing to screw up, and somehow you got that.
And then you completely negate any good that you've done when you have this final scene with Claw. John! Ha 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 ha! Let me sit here and give you more than enough time, good guy, to defeat the villain. My father and I saw Man of Steel, the Superman film, in one of the many reboots that DC's done, because they can't get it together either. And the fight scene between Superman and Zod, spoiler if you haven't seen the movie, I'm about to spoil the end. You've had a decade. I don't feel bad. It ends with Superman breaking Zod's neck. They fight for a good 15 minutes and he just breaks his neck. My father, who is as big a Superman fan as I am a Ghostbusters fan, the movie ends and I go, "What did you think?" And he goes, "It was great until he killed Zod. What was the point? All of that just to break his neck?" That's how I feel when you take the greatest prop in the film and you destroy it with a pen cartridge. All of this so that he has more than enough time to take a pen apart and shoot the cartridge from the spring to hit a button on the claw to send it into a malfunction that then is going to crash the helicopter. This is way too much setup to destroy what should be an indestructible prop.
And also, where is this visualize your goal coming from? This is probably part of what got cut, because I'm wondering if that was sort of his advice to himself when trying to solve things and you know, to solve problems. But before he takes out, or as he's, you know, taking the pen cartridge apart, he's like, visualize your goal. So now we've established that your heart is operating all of this and you're going back to thought. It makes no sense. If you're using sheer will at this point, it should just work itself out, which is convenient, yes, but at least it would have carried the thread all the way through. And then, you know, he saves Brenda, barely, because he doesn't know, since he didn't read the manual, we get that joke one more time. He doesn't know how to deploy the parachute. And just before they're ready to hit the ground, he's able to get a parasol out. But she asks him again, didn't you read the manual? You watched him not read it.
Do you know what the worst part about the ending of this film for me is? There's two things, and it's in the same moment.
There's no repercussions for any of the bad guys.
No, Claw gets arrested.
No, and Sykes goes into minion rehab, but Kramer's gone.
No, here are the two biggest problems. First off, Gadget doesn't get Claw. The Gadget mobile gets Claw. Claw happens to fall into the back of the Gadget mobile, which then turns itself into a jail cell. So your hero does not even capture the villain.
I was actually okay with that because it's a callback to the first capture, because that's how they got one of the escaped prisoners. But it also, that's the one through line that's been consistent throughout this movie, is that Gadget is inept and it's the car that's doing it. So I was actually okay that they followed through with that.
Here's the other thing, and this is where they may as well just have said, we didn't read the source material. Every episode of Inspector Gadget, every single one, at the end of the credits, has Dr. Claw saying, I'll get you next time, Gadget. Next time.
Right.
And in this movie, he goes, I'm gonna get you next time, Gadget, and I'm waiting for him to just tag us with, just give us the fan service of next time, just like the show, because at least then it's like, all right, it's at least true to the source material. And instead he goes, I'll get you next time, Gadget. I'll get you. Every episode of the show ends that way. It's the easiest line to write for the film, and you wrote it wrong.
I'm wondering if that has anything to do with, well, no, if they had the rights, they would have the rights to that.
They owned Deke.
Yeah, there's no excuse.
Much like they got out of the film by trimming a lot of unnecessary conversation and leaving it on the floor, I think it's time we move on and start talking about the cast, because otherwise we could just keep shredding this plot apart, but the writers did that.
Yeah, the cast that we did end up with.
Oh, man. And you know, here's the thing. I don't blame the cast. I do not blame the cast.
No, I blame Matthew Broderick a little bit.
I love Matthew Broderick. He was awful in this movie. But it's because I think he was directed to be awful in this movie.
Here's the thing. If a script is poorly written and doesn't make sense, you as the actor are going to see that. However, if it doesn't make sense, you're also going to trust the director to know what he's doing with it. So because you're so in it, you're trusting the director to have that bird's eye view of everything that's happening. And maybe you don't understand exactly how the big picture is going to play out, but you are trusting the director to do that. I would like to believe if something didn't make sense, there was a conversation had. There were questions being asked, because when a movie falls apart this badly, you have to know. You can't just look at it as because you know your character. You know that there's got to be an arc through the whole thing. So if something's not making sense to you, you can't just get through it scene by scene. There's got to be part of the onus on you to look at the bigger picture as far as where your character is going to end up. And we don't have a full character arc. I don't care that maybe there were scenes that were cut and maybe something else would have made sense. If you don't see your arc from point A to point B at the end, that does fall back to the actor.
Rupert Everett plays Skull-X/Claw. He was miscast. I don't blame him for that. I think that they tried to make this eccentric tycoon. I think that they tried to make a parody of what these things are. It works for Dr. Evil. It doesn't work here for Dr. Claw. The fact that you wanted to cast James Earl Jones and you didn't. The fact that you wanted to cast Tim Curry and you didn't. Like, I feel like they rewrote for this character, for this version of the character. Again, he's acting out what he was hired to do. I don't think he fumbled the ball. I think the casting, I think the writing fumbled the ball.
I think that he was a last-ditch effort to get more name talent into this movie because he was huge at the time. He was in my best friend's wedding, but he was more known for, like, rom-coms.
Yeah.
So I think that because you cast who at the time was like a known pretty boy, he wanted the FaceTime. So they weren't going to eliminate the character from being on screen. And that's a fail across the board. It could have been the directing choice. It could have been him saying, well, if I'm going to be in this movie, you're not cutting my face out of it. And in that case, if you're going to be a part of Inspector Gadget and you're going to play the villain, then you should know, take the back seat in something that's going to better service the film.
Jolie Fisher plays Brenda Bradford. Golden Globe nominated. Not for this. Jolie Fisher. Again, talent. Talent! This character is awkward. She's clunky. She's supposed to be wildly intelligent. But they dumb her down. I truly believe this. More wasted talent.
I agree. I mean, this is 1999. It's not like early 90s where people didn't know how to write strong female leads at this point. They did. You bothered to make her a doctor. Other than the scene where she's assisting her father, we really don't see her do anything to grow the character. We don't see her making a real intelligent move. We don't see her acting out against Claw in any way because she regresses into damsel in distress by the end of this.
Yeah.
When she should be the one, if they were going to keep Gadget totally inept, which they did, you could have had her be the voice that pushes him forward and figures everything out.
Mm-hmm. Michelle Trachtenberg plays Penny.
This was originally a Lindsay Lohan role, but she was tied up in Parent Trap at the time, and wow, did that work out for her.
Penny, I talked about it before, source material plays a big hand in helping Inspector Gadget, helping him fail upward because she really is part of the brains behind the operation, more of the brains behind the operation. Most of that gets lost in this film, which is a shame. Because I know Michelle Trachtenberg can solve crimes. Because I watched her do it in Harriet the Spy.
That's the thing. Like, it's such a shame because I do think that she was a better casting choice than Lindsay Lohan in this case, if they were both up for the role. And she only got it because Lindsay Lohan passed. But I think she was the better choice. But what's a shame is that she doesn't get to show her acting chops or versatility any more than she did when she was like 8 years old in Harriet the Spy, which was her first movie.
D.L. Hughley voices the Gadget Mobile. I have nothing against D.L. Hughley. I think he's extraordinarily funny. This character does not need to exist. This character does not need to speak. This character does not need to have a personality. It doesn't need to tell us, hey, go to Disneyland, make my employer happy during the end credits. It doesn't need to talk about Skittles. It doesn't need to chase Volkswagen Beetles around. This is the worst character, I think, in the movie.
Do you think that they did this because they took out the watch?
Maybe. Which they introduced during the end credits.
That a huge miss. Just
one of
why bother?
One of the coolest props from the show.
Yep.
One of the coolest props from the show.
And you could have given, you know what I bet happened? I bet that was part of what got cut. And they instead of cutting it all together, they wanted to at least give a wink and a nod to it. And that's how it ended up in the credits. I bet you cut a lot of Penny scenes and feeding him information. And they were like, well, we can't have a Gadget movie without the watch. Fans are going to get mad. And that's why they relegated it to the credits.
Two of the best cast in the film, though. Sherry O'Terry as Mayor Wilson and Dabney Coleman as Chief Quimby. You couldn't get a more, I'm here for my photo op, and I don't want to be here anymore, than these two. They're actually very good.
I can't believe that we made it all the way through without talking about Sherry O'Terry. If there's anything that I like about this movie, it's this character. And perfectly I think I don't even know that it was the character that I like so much as they cast the perfect person and she made it what it is. Especially because she's so pint-sized and she's like, come on, I'm going to wrangle everybody. I'm in total control of this. And, you know, she's pushing this Gadget project agenda. She was fantastic. Knocked it out of the park.
Then you have Andy Dick and Michael Haggerty as Kramer and Sykes. I agree with you. I like Andy Dick in this movie. I mean, Haggerty's fine. He's funny. He's silly, but he's just more funny and silly, and you didn't need more funny and silly. But I wish we would have seen what happened to Kramer. And if I wanted to see if he was really being held there against his will, because Andy Dick did play a balance there between you don't know if he's there because he's being held against his will or if he just wants money and Claw's throwing it at him.
You didn't need both of these characters. I think you could have rolled them up into one. And if the only reason that you have Sykes is because you needed somebody to be watching the security footage, you could have had Kramer do that entire thing. And it also would have made this confessional with Penny feel so much less ridiculous if Kramer's character had the full breakdown, because we've seen him struggle at this point. It would have been so much easier for Penny to break him than it was Kramer deciding, I want to be one of the good guys for absolutely no reason whatsoever, because Kramer was already conflicted. So you definitely didn't need both, which is completely validated by the fact that one of these characters just disappears altogether.
Final thoughts.
Really? You're asking?
Well, here, you know what? I'm going to just get this out of the way. This is... I don't think it's the worst, but this is one of the worst films that I've ever seen in my life. This is one of the worst films that we've ever discussed on this show. I actually think it's probably the second worst. I still don't think it's worse than Rocket Man.
Ooh!
Rocket Man is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Ouch. I don't think this is as bad as that. I do think it is worse than $1 Million Duck.
That was going to be my question.
I do think it is worse than High School Musical 2. Because you were hand-given source material. You were hand-given a cherished, successful, profitable franchise. And this was the best you could do with it in 1999. It's the second worst movie we've ever reviewed on this show, and I have nothing else to say about it.
Well, Siskel and Ebert would agree with you, because this did land on their list of the worst films of all time, along with $1 Million Duck. Yeah, it's just so bad across the board. For me, taking the source material out of it, taking the fact that it's got an established franchise out of it, this is just a victim of changing too many hands, and it shows. I wish that they would have held it a little bit longer and wrote it in a way where they got it right, because this was just such a huge miss. And I think it still would have been, factoring in the source material, factoring in the fan base, it still would have been a viable film a few years later. But what's interesting to me is that, clearly every department had to see that it was falling apart from top to bottom. And now, when things like that happen, they won't even put these films into theaters. They won't release these films on streamers. They'll use them as a tax write-off. And at the time, that's what they should have done with this one. But because there were far fewer movies being produced at the time, because there were no streamers, if you had your slate of films and theatrical releases lined up for the year, you had to hit them. So whatever the movie was, they were going to just put it out there. And that's why you're going to have a dud every now and again. And that's why, despite all of the clear obstacles that they faced getting this film together, they still had to roll with it. They didn't have a choice. But, if there was anything that they were going to look to remake now, I'd start here.
Agreed. And we want to know what you have to say. You can join the conversation on social media on all major platforms at Monoreel Radio, or you can shoot us an email, monoreelradio@gmail.com. News of the week is coming up, but first a quick break.
News of the Week is proudly sponsored by KMV Travel. KMV Travel is a boutique travel agency that helps families plan personalized vacations and create unforgettable memories on land and at sea. KMV Travel specializes in Disney destinations, family theme parks, and most major cruise lines, providing unmatched service from start to finish with the belief that vacations are an important part of life. KMV Travel will help you and your family experience new places, learn about other cultures, relax, and reconnect with those who mean most. KMV Travel will guide you from booking to bon voyage, ensuring you have the tools you need to enjoy each moment of your vacation at no extra cost to you. Visit kmvtravel.com to connect with an expert travel advisor and start planning your getaway now.
Record-breaking nominations for Disney at the 76th Primetime Emmy Awards.
I have thoughts.
183 nominations. 32 of which are from Disney Plus.
And there it is. There it is. 183. Wow. That should sound impressive, right? Wrong. That should be a red flag. 183 nominations. How? How, when shows are constantly being pulled from streamers and not given a chance to make it to season 2, how do you have that many? Because you own so much at this point. That's not an impressive statistic because it sounds like a monopoly, because everything almost at this point is controlled by one of 3 companies. We are back to where we were in Hollywood in the 1920s. It's ridiculous. 32 makes sense because those were produced under the Disney banner itself. But the 183 comes from the Fox Searchlight, the Hulu, the whatever you decided to purchase this week. And now you're touting that as your own because it's under technically the Walt Disney Studios banner. Okay, fine. But it's just too much at this point.
And 7 of those, by the way, 7 of those nominations came from their broadcast of the Oscars. They got 7 nominations on broadcasting the Oscars.
The Oscars were much better this year than they've been in past.
Yeah, that's not really saying
the
much.
ceremony itself was vastly improved.
152 nominations. 152 were through Hulu. 152.
No, and that's not to say that there's not great programming on Hulu. There is, but it feels to me like we've lost the plot. You are spread so thin. Your box office numbers are doing a lot of the talking for you. Maybe we need to shift focus and rein it in a little bit and, do fewer projects where you can put full effort into, and then it will feel like you've earned these nominations.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Thank you all so much for joining us this and every week on Monoreel Radio. Monoreel Radio will always be free, but there are many ways that you can help support the show. Please give us a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Join the conversation on social media at Monoreel Radio on all major platforms. Share your favorite episodes with family and friends who may enjoy them. And of course, book your next trip with Jackie. Links to everything can be found at monoreelradio.com. We all get one story. Make yours a magical one.
On behalf of Monoreel Radio, we'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll see you at the movies, the stuff dreams are made of.